Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. Today is Thursday, October 7th, 2015, otherwise known as What the Hell is Going On Capitol Hill Day. Joining us to hopefully shed some light on this is Duane, Generalissimo Patterson of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome to the show, sir. Great to have you on board.
Well, it's always glad to be back, and I join our fellow watchers as welcoming him to the What the Hell Do We Know show.
The What the Hell Do We Know? When we woke up this morning, we just kind of assumed that Kevin McCarthy was going to at least stand for election as Speaker of the House. This is the next in line. Kevin McCarthy is Majority Leader. He's a Majority Leader, by the way, because Eric Cantor lost his election the last time out. And so John Boehner's been kind of just hanging around, waiting for a good moment to make a leadership change. And all of this blew up today because Kevin McCarthy apparently couldn't get past about 200 votes and decided to bag it at that point. And now we don't even know when the Republicans are going to have a nomination for House Speaker.
Well, and here's what I've learned so far, and here's what we think is going on. Kevin McCarthy was probably closer to 218 than we think. He may not have had 218 right on the button, but he was probably arms could have probably been twisted and deals could have been made, and it could have happened. But I think Kevin McCarthy was genuine in his willingness to kind of put the party ahead of his own ambition here. I think Kevin finally decided, hey, I would want to be Speaker if it was 240 votes for Speaker, but I don't want to eke in at 218, 219, 220 and have that kind of dissension going in, because we've already had enough of that in this caucus already. And I don't think if I go in with 218, 219, and 20, yeah, I'm Speaker, yay me, but that doesn't solve anything, and I just don't think that's healthy. So for the good, for the sake of the party, for the sake of the movement, I'll stay where I'm at. He's not leaving Congress. He's not even leaving leadership. He still is content in remaining as Majority Leader or the number 2 position, because, and by most accounts, I think everybody else just kind of cleared the floor for him and said, okay, fine, we'll now redo things for Speaker. It has been started on some places in radio and around in the internet already that there is now an attack at John Boehner. Like, okay, well, Kevin McCarthy gets praise, and deservedly so, for not being such a flaming egomaniac and stepping down. Okay, fine. Nobody's going to give Kevin McCarthy a hard time.
Right.
But boy, that John Boehner, we're into Banana Republic territory now. That John Boehner, we've got 3 people that were up for a Speaker election. One of the 2 just said, take me out. So John Boehner says, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll just cancel the whole thing and I'll stay as Speaker indefinitely, and we'll tell you when we're going to have another election, if we have another election. I'll just hang out here for a while. And everybody's starting to pile on John Boehner. And
now have they now dispensed with the October 29th vote too? I mean, I was kind of thinking, oh, they have. Okay. I was kind of thinking that they had just postponed the Republican nomination vote. So the whole thing's off the table now.
The whole thing's off the table for a while, indefinitely.
Wow.
And here's what I think is going on. And I know I put myself in an unenviable position of being the defender of John Boehner. And John Boehner has done a lot of things that I disagree with. But I understand why he's doing what he's doing here. John Boehner, he wants to go to Florida. He wants to sit in the beach smoking his cools. He wants to go to K Street. Whatever he's going to do in retirement, he's going to go do. He's done. Mentally, he's done with this. It's not that he's saying, "Oh, goody, I get to be Speaker for another year or 2 years or 5 years or whatever else. They need me." I don't get that vibe from John Boehner at all. I don't think that's what's at play here. I think what John Boehner doesn't want is to leave the speakership with the House in a hot steaming pile of mess.
Well, right, and it makes sense because you get a chance to add some time in here because you don't have the time pressure if you've removed the October 29th vote. But
exactly. Here's what I think is going on, because as soon as that landscape now shifts, it's not that John Boehner, and don't get me wrong, there will be an establishment type candidate that the speaker backs, that they're going to want to run for this job, and that's how the process works. Now, she may not get the support they need to get to enough votes, but what Boehner, I think, is doing here, with McCarthy out of play, if people knew that 3 weeks ago, you would see people like Jeb Hensarling all of a sudden making a push for speaker. You would see people like Pete Sessions making a run for speaker. And I don't think Pete Sessions will get it, but you'd see him making maneuvers. You would see, I know Paul Ryan has said abjectly, I don't want it. If elected, I will not serve.
Said it again today. Said it again today. He doesn't want the job.
Today. But as soon as he said that again today, Jonah Goldberg, our good friend over at National Review, put up on Twitter, he put up what Paul Ryan said, and then he in a retweet he says, "Get the nets quick." Grab them.
Well, or I almost said Kurt Gowdy. That tells you how old I am. Trey Gowdy.
Jason Chaffetz might be able to garner more support this way.
Chaffetz is not a bad choice. I mean,
no, and there are a million possibilities.
Kathy
out there.
Kathy McMorris Rogers, who would be the first Republican woman to be Speaker of the House.
Exactly. There are three or four other options here of people that may throw their hat into the ring that wouldn't have, or that didn't throw their hat in the ring up till now because they thought Kevin McCarthy was a shoo-in, and that was not the right hill to go die on.
Right.
Now that Kevin has taken himself out of contention, there is going to be a process where there's jockeying for position going on right now to say, oh, well, maybe now that's a different window now. Maybe I could garner support and triangulate here.
Yeah,
go ahead.
If I had my druthers, right, it would either be Paul Ryan or Trey Gowdy, because I think those two guys would be the best points of unity in the caucus. And
I'll tell you who I'd like. I'd like Mike Pompeo. Is who I'd like.
Mike Pompeo would be a pretty decent choice. The names that we've been hearing, at least initially, are Tom Price, who is the Republican Study Committee chair, Peter Roskam,
Budget Committee Chairman now,
Peter Roskam, and Kathy McMorris Rogers, who I
don't even think Steve Scalise would be horrible.
No, but I don't think he would get much support. And it's interesting that nobody's really talking about Scalise because he used to be one of the deep conservatives.
He used to be the heir apparent for the conservative movement.
Right. And when you become whip, things change. Yeah, things change. People get a different perspective on you. I was talking, I won't say where this was at. I was talking on one of my trips, right, for the book, to somebody who was a Republican Party official in this county. And the vice chair was somebody that they were looking for a political race for him to jump into because he's a very popular guy. Right. And he started to run for the chair of the county. And it was, these guys were saying, don't do it. Everybody loves the vice chair. Nobody likes the chair. So if you want to run for an office, whatever you do not become chair of the GOP here because you become a target.
It's like majority leader position.
It's a majority leader in the whip position is the same way. You're there to crack heads and to get people in line, and nobody likes that.
It has been famously said about majority position and whip. If your best day is your first day, after your first day, you start making enemies.
Right. So you don't want to make enemies. I get that, and I think that there are people in this caucus who could unify the different factions, at least for a while. And I think you're right. McCarthy, here's the thing. I think prior to the remarks about the Benghazi Select Committee, people would have grumbled, but McCarthy would have gotten the votes. And I don't think it would have even been close. I think people would have just said, we just need to get this thing moving along. They would have twisted his arm a little bit to get a couple of concessions out of him, and that would have been the end of it. But I think after the comments about the Benghazi Select Committee, which were damaging, and which were really this was an unforced error on McCarthy's part. I think that was a catalyst. That wasn't the reason, but that was the catalyst for this. So now you got a chance to start over again. And I think Boehner, you kick it out. He says indefinitely. My guess is that this thing's wrapped up by Thanksgiving because he wants to get out of there.
Oh, and I think so too. But can I give you another scenario from from pseudo recent historical perspective as to another angle that nobody's talked about?
Is this a Game of Thrones Red Wedding sort of thing?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. All right, good. Because that would have been depressing.
This is from California. This is when I first cut my teeth doing radio back in 1995. In California, we have a bicameral system here. We have an assembly and we have a state senate. As you well know, you used to be from California.
Yes, I did.
The Democrats have run California politics in the state house for all but 2 years in one chamber in the assembly, our lower house. The Democrats have run everything for the last 60 years, 70 years, something like that. There was a 2-year window where, for just a fluke, the Republicans actually had a 1-seat majority in the assembly in 1995. Okay?
Yeah, I think that was when my uncle was in there. My uncle Jim Morrissey.
Is your uncle Jim Morrissey?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, my uncle is Jim Morrissey. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well,
two-term assemblyman.
I remember Assemblyman Morrissey, and I never knew that. I never made the connection. Anyway, there was a period of time where the Republicans like, oh goody, well, okay, now what do? We got to find a speaker of the assembly. We got to figure this stuff out. My first job in radio, I produced a guy named Warren Duffy. He had a show called Live from LA.
Yeah, Warren Duffy. I remember Warren Duffy. Yeah,
which was a political show that was on a Christian station, KKLA, our Salem sister station out of Los Angeles. But Duffy lived in Huntington Beach, so we had a little nondescript office building off the 405 freeway, and it was in Huntington Beach. And in the office building right across the hall from us, literally right across the hall, was the district office for then Assemblywoman Doris Allen.
Okay.
Doris Allen was a know-nothing ditz of an Assemblywoman who won that gig 2 or 3 times because she was a Republican, had an R after her name, and that city was a Republican city. Just the way that district was carved out, it was a Republican district, one of the few left in California, and she got it.
Right.
Willie Brown, who, legendary voice in Democratic politics, has run California for 50 years. Willie Brown, former mayor of San Francisco, former everything in California, used to be the Speaker of the Assembly until the Republicans won one election by 1 seat. Okay? So what did Willie Brown do? He took every Democrat and he went to Doris Allen and he blew smoke up her skirt. And he said, you know what's going to happen? You're going to be Speaker. He said, just think, the first woman Speaker in the history of the state of California, and it's going to be you. Look at all these great plans we've got. And he talked to her, and all of a sudden, she voted with the Democrats to make herself Speaker.
Yep.
And so even though the Republicans had the numbers to run the assembly, guess who ran the assembly for the next year and a half?
Oh, yeah.
Until she got recalled, by the way. Successfully so, because she made a deal with the devil and did that. Now, why do I bring this up? Because the way this thing works in the House of Representatives, it's not a formal everybody on the outside votes. House members vote for Speaker. You need whoever gets 218 votes, and that could be a Republicans, that could be a Democrats, gets to be Speaker. They hold a conference vote first inside the Republican caucus, which is what,
246? 246. Yeah, I think it's 246.
Somewhere in there?
Yeah.
Okay. So ideally, you'd think within their own little room, we've got 218 for sure. We'd like to say we've got 240 so that we go to the floor, mob rules, suck eggs, Democrats. This is who the next Speaker is. If John Boehner did the parliamentary routine where he says, well, 3 people were in, 1's out, we've got 2 left, I guess we just take it to the floor and see what happens. Now what you run the risk of is if either the two that are left can't get a block of 218 because you've got varying factions for lots of different reasons. Now you've got Nancy Pelosi and 195 Democrats, something like that, 198 Democrats, right?
Yes.
She can go to some schlep of a Northeast Republican and say, we're going to make you a deal. How would you like to be Speaker? And I know that sounds far-fetched. It's actually not unprecedented in the United States House of Representatives. It has happened before multiple times.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a high probability. I grant you that. But don't think that that hasn't entered into John Boehner's thinking here, too. Because if the party is completely at odds and you've got multiple factions that are now scrambling, and because of procedure, and you said, well, I'm out by this certain date, I got to stick by this hard and fast certain date, and we're going to hold this election no matter what, even if we've got to take it to the floor, I don't think you want to do that.
No, and again, this gets a chance to have people settle things down a bit, to make their own way to this election and figure out who's going to do the best job of bringing these two factions together.
Now throw their hat into the ring and say, in fact, you know what? Just into the studio, Ed Morrissey, I've got audio. I've been waiting for this audio to show up. I actually have secret audio for the House Republican Conference after the decision was made by Kevin McCarthy to not become Speaker. Would you be interested in hearing that audio?
Let's hear it. Lay it on us, Duane.
Secret audio. Here's the House Republican Conference.
Sheriff murdered. Crops burned, stores looted, people stampeded, and cattle raped. Now the time has come to act, and act fast. I'm leaving.
You get back here, you pious, Kenny state winter. Ain't no way that nobody's gonna leave this town.
Well, there you go. It's authentic frontier gibberish coming at you from the House Republican Congress.
I could have played more, but
yeah.
but you get the point.
Gabby Johnson is right. Thank you, Van. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
I'm sorry, I had to.
Well, it makes sense. This is an artificial deadline in the first place, and if you kick it out a couple of weeks, it's not a great big tragedy, except for the fact, of course, that now this is going to be playing all over the news for the next few days, that Republicans are at civil war.
Congressman through the end of next year.
Right.
There's nothing that says he has to leave Congress right now.
No, but it does look bad. I mean, you know what the headlines are? The headlines are that Republican civil war,
right.
The extremists
are horrible. I totally get that. If I'm John Boehner, what's the least worst option right now?
Right.
The optics or making sure the House doesn't completely collapse into anarchy?
I'm guessing, though, in the end, that Trey Gowdy's going to allow himself to be drawn into this race. I don't necessarily think that the Benghazi Select Committee is enough of a draw for him to stay on the sidelines, especially when you have this much unrest taking place. And he is a guy who could very conceivably unite the factions. I'm not sure that Chaffetz is. He might be, but Gowdy certainly would be.
You want to know the timing? Here's the timing. If John Boehner stalls for a month,
right,
stalls for 30 days, do you know what we're going to know by then?
Well, Hillary Clinton will have testified before the Benghazi Select Committee.
Yes, she will, won't she?
And by postponing this, Trey Gowdy doesn't have to talk about it until after Hillary Clinton gets done testifying. And that's probably a significant reason why Boehner's doing what he's doing, is to give Gowdy that room. Because if Gowdy had said earlier, right, if he had said a week ago, yeah, I'm going to run for Speaker, and then he conducts the hearing on Hillary Clinton, it would reinforce what McCarthy had to say about the Benghazi Select Committee, right? Now you kind of remove that, and afterwards he's open then to to pushing through on that. The Republicans can find somebody else to chair the Benghazi Select Committee.
Right.
So I suspect that Gowdy's going to come off the bench at that point. That's my guess. But at any rate, there are a number of people here who could step up and do that.
I would love to have Trey Gowdy take that gig up, but I would love to have Trey Gowdy take that gig up once they've talked to Hillary Clinton.
Yes, I agree. I think that's
because
actually
you
pretty
want
smart
Trey
idea.
Gowdy prosecuting and cross-examining Hillary Clinton.
You
all
want him
day.
on that wall. You need him on that wall.
Absolutely. And remember, they've got most of what they need. Not everything, but most of what they need. What they are doing is they're layering a perjury trap for Hillary Clinton, and she's going to be in that trap all day long.
Right. Yeah.
And she's like the last domino to fall here. There may be a couple things that the committee has to do a little bit here and there afterwards, but by and large, I think after that's done, it's going to be pretty much time to, type up the report, send it to the printers, and you don't need Trey Gowdy to do all that work himself.
No. And besides which, he's available if he can certainly contribute to that, even if he's not chairing it any longer.
And the next chairman of the committee, probably until the resolution of it and the formality of it, the resolution, you probably are looking at somebody like Mike Pompeo taking over the committee.
I would think so. Yeah, I would think so. Absolutely.
Or Jim Jordan or somebody like that, but
Right.
probably Pompeo.
Or Dave Camp, who did a pretty good job with the IRS stuff at Ways and Means when he was chairing Ways and Means.
I think probably Pompeo because he's more of a Harvard lawyer. I think Pompeo's a better pick.
Oh, there you go, Pompeo. I mean, you've got plenty of talent in the House to do this type of thing. So yes, I think after the Hillary Clinton testimony, Gowdy then is freed up to jump into this race, and then you still have plenty of time to schedule the speaker vote. You can do it before the Thanksgiving recess, and you come back. Gowdy's speaker, Boehner's on retirement, and
if Trey Gowdy threw his hat in the ring and said, "Well, if he does, the aw shucks Southern, the South Carolina, humility, and says this is not something I sought, but if this is, for the better of the party, I'll do the best I can to serve."
Yep,
he'll get 200. He'll get 240 votes.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at a certain point, you got to get this thing done, and you got to get it wrapped up, and
in the end result is, he's good at messaging. He's good at
right.
He's got everything you want.
Yeah, he's probably a more reliable person to put up front on these things.
And he's not afraid to pick a fight when it's a
That's why I say I think
fight to have.
That's why I say I think he'd be a unifying figure. So basically, we're going to need to wait until after Hillary Clinton's testimony, and then things should start to clarify themselves. I think that's a pretty good read on the situation. All right, let's move on to a different topic, though.
Okay.
Hillary Clinton has been talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership for 3 or 4 years about how she played a key role in setting this up.
Can I play you a montage of Hillary Clinton for the last 5 years before yesterday?
Yeah, you got to have a montage. Let's hear the montage.
I have a montage courtesy of our friends at the Free Beacon.
Free Beacon.
Pretty good at these types of montagey things. Let me get this up, and this is Hillary Clinton on her position on the TPP.
The United States is engaging in the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade negotiations. We're pursuing a regional agreement with the nations of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We are also pressing ahead with negotiations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Trans-Pacific Partnership, a new free trade agreement.
We are very committed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Trans-Pacific Partnership. Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Trans-Pacific Partnership. We should aim for true regional integration. And that is the spirit behind the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership.
High-quality Trans-Pacific Partnership. We're excited about the innovative trade agreement called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Trans-Pacific Partnership.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Trans-Pacific Partnership. A far-reaching new trade agreement called the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
From new trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we also discussed the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
We've used trade negotiations over
the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
There's another question that I got asking you where you stand on Trans-Pacific Partnership.
There are questions being raised about this current agreement. It hasn't been fully negotiated yet, so I don't know what the final provisions are yet.
So now all of a sudden she's against it.
And by the way, Anne-Marie Slaughter, the day before Hillary comes out and opposes it, Anne-Marie Slaughter, who was her director of policy at the State Department, talks about is challenged on NPR about coming up with an achievement of Hillary Clinton. And what does Anne-Marie Slaughter say? Well, you know, the deal with Iran and the Trans-Pacific Partnership that John Kerry's claiming credit for, well, really, Hillary did all the lifting on that. And so those are her achievements. Right? The day before, Hillary says, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, back away, back away. I mean, Duane. Duane!
The fun part about this, you have Hillary Clinton. I mean, the benefits of Hillary Clinton stubbing her toe here is just grand. We were worried on the right about Iowa and New Hampshire, the prospects of which being Iowa is an open caucus state, New Hampshire is an open primary state, right?
Well, it's semi-open. You have to declare one primary or the other. You can't vote in both. So it's considered semi-open. Yeah.
In the political season, the conventional wisdom that we were in 3 months ago.
Yep.
Hillary Clinton was a shoo-in. There was no action on the Democratic side. Democrats were going to be bored in Iowa and New Hampshire. And so why not have fun and declare yourself a Republican for the day and go play and pick the craziest wingnut bastards you can find on the Republican side, because there's no action on our side.
Yeah, Rush did that in 2008, right? When
Operation Chaos.
Operation Chaos. Thank you. I couldn't remember that.
But what I'm saying now is there is an element of that that can happen and would have happened in this thing that is now no longer going to happen, because look at what Hillary Clinton is doing. She's, of all the Republicans, she's most worried about Marco Rubio. Her team has stated that. Her supporters have stated that. But now Marco Rubio is a distant memory. They're terrified, not of Bernie. They're worried about Joe Biden.
Yeah, they shouldn't be. Joe Biden is a terrible campaigner.
Except for, did you read the Jonathan Martin story?
No, is that
in the New York Times?
No, I know Jonathan Martin writes for the New York Times, but no, I haven't read it. Why?
Guess who came to visit Joe Biden at the old VP residence at the Naval Observatory a couple of weeks ago to have just a friendly chat about stuff?
Jesse Ventura.
The future.
Jesse Ventura.
No.
Who?
Liz Warren.
Yeah, but I think I'd heard that before, right? I mean, was that new?
If Joe Biden is starting to hint and float the idea of a unified ticket between Joe Biden and Liz Warren for a Democratic primary process, all of a sudden Bernie Sanders dries up, right? Because he's wrinkled up old fossil, but he's the not Hillary, and he's the progressive that the fever swamp really wants. But if Liz Warren all of a sudden kind of hitches her wagon to the Joe Biden star, if you're a Democratic fever swamp person out there, isn't that everything you could ever want?
Let me shower a bunch of cold water on this for you. First off, Liz Warren didn't want to run for president. I don't know why she would want to run for vice president. I mean, it's basically the same thing, only you don't get to do anything at the end. Secondly, Joe Biden is the guy who spent 40 years defending corporations in Delaware. I mean, this is...
Edmore, you're thinking about this as a Republican. You are thinking about this logically. I'm asking you to think about this as a progressive. I'm asking you to think about this emotionally.
So, but you're going to have a 67-year-old and a 73-year-old at the top of the ticket on a party that's based that based its last two presidential election victories on energizing the youth base.
Grant me the premise: if you had a Joe Biden stated, we're going to run as a ticket, we're going to run as a team, Biden and Warren. If just grant me the premise. If that was dropped on the Democratic side, what happens amongst the Democratic side here? What is that? How does mainstream media, how does the left react to a Biden-Warren ticket?
For about a week, they have a collective political orgasm. After about a week, everybody's going to remember what kind of a candidate Joe Biden was. He's done this twice before. He's done this twice, and he's fallen on his face both times. I mean, yes, I get the idea that people have been talking about Liz Warren this and Liz Warren that, and I get that she, at one point in this cycle, was the hot ticket. But I got news for you. Bernie Sanders is eclipsed her on that. Bernie Sanders is Liz Warren squared right now. And the only thing that will eclipse Bernie Sanders is a very large ground organization that can get out the vote better than he can. And the only person in the race who's got that, who even has a hint of getting that, I should say, because we don't even know if she does, is Hillary Clinton. She's the one who's got the resources for it. She's the one who's got at least some of the organization in place to do things like that. So, I mean, you can add people to...
Where do you think the union support goes if that ticket is out there?
Well, I mean, this is the reason why she went with TPP, right? Because the union support was going to Bernie. I would still say the union support will end up going with Bernie. I don't think it goes with Biden. I think it goes with Bernie in that situation.
I don't think so. I think it goes with... If it's a Biden-Warren
thing...
Well,
let me put it to you this way. Then let me put it to you this way. I think then the union vote splits...
Is Hillary dead? I mean, you could say she's dead candidate walking now, and I wouldn't argue with you.
General election, I think she's a dead candidate walking.
I agree. If a Biden-Warren ticket gets in, and then you still have Bernie over there, is Hillary a dead duck?
I think Hillary's a dead duck for other reasons.
In a primary.
I think Hillary's a dead duck for other reasons. And yes, I think if Biden gets with or without Liz Warren, I think if Joe Biden gets into the race, he's going to draw off a number of Hillary Clinton voters, simply because they're starting to, get very concerned about the fact that she stinks as a candidate. And this is even apart from the email situation. She is just a very bad candidate. She's a terrible candidate on the campaign trail.
She's horrific. And everyone knows this.
Well, they're all rediscovering it. Here's the thing. I mean, I've been writing about this for some time. This election cycle is about authenticity. That's the reason why Donald Trump and Ben Carson are at the top of the Republican polls. Regardless of whatever else you think about Donald Trump and Ben Carson, they are their authentic selves on the campaign trail.
And Carly, for that matter.
Yeah, and Carly's getting up there, but they're their authentic selves. The reason why Bernie Sanders is gaining so much traction
is because he tells you what he thinks.
He is not putting on any sort of false front. This is who Bernie Sanders is.
The reason Joe Biden is so lovable is because, in spite of the gaffes, in spite of all the nonsense, the reason everybody still loves Joe is because he wears his heart on his sleeve.
Yeah, but I mean, let's not go overboard. Let's not go overboard. Let's not go overboard with the Biden thing either, because this is the same guy who was plagiarizing speeches from Neil Kinnock in 1987.
I understand. I'm not saying he's without flaws. God, I mean,
no, but I'm talking specifically.
Would Joe Biden be the one we have to run against?
I am talking specifically about authenticity, and I will say this: you get much more of a sense of authenticity from Joe Biden than you do from Hillary Clinton. But that's not saying a whole lot either. No, I mean, so
she is the most inauthentic
person
that has ever run for president.
And this TPP flip flop is another demonstration of this. And so, by the way, is this Val character on Saturday Night Live. It is so obviously forced. It is so obviously manipulation.
Right. The only way you can make her look fun and make her look self-deprecating is to script it out for her. That's the only way you can do it.
Exactly. And that's the problem. That's the problem with her. By the way, I don't know if you saw this in the Wall Street Journal, but did you see where NBC might now have to offer up equal time to Bernie Sanders and Martin O'Malley and other people because they put her on that show? Yeah. I didn't realize this, but
they have a point.
I mean, Sanders and O'Malley and the others are going to have to ask for it. But in the market areas where they're campaigning.
It should be an in-kind political.
It really was. I mean, and as people said, apparently the whole show was. I didn't watch the show, but apparently the whole show was that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, that's what you have to do to make Hillary, even in the ballpark of being attractive as a candidate, is to have her doing scripts on Saturday Night Live. And look, I mean, I think we made a mistake in poo-pooing the low information voter media campaign that Barack Obama ran in 2012. Actually, in retrospect, it was a pretty smart concept, doing the People Magazine and Entertainment Tonight circuit. But that's because Obama already had a core group of voters on whom he could rely, and he was just adding to it with those strategies. I don't think Hillary Clinton's got that, because voters out there don't think that Hillary Clinton is interested in their problems. And that's part of the honesty issue. That's part of the trustworthiness issue. You take a look at where she is at on cares about the problems of people like me in these polls, and it's atrocious. It's miles away from where Barack Obama was. And don't forget that Barack Obama only won that last election by 3 percentage points in the popular poll, popular vote. It was a close election. It's closer, I think, than people remember it to be.
So my super secret Hill source has been texting me about what he's hearing, and he was just told that Trey Gowdy really wants to be a judge and doesn't want to stay in Congress forever, but this may be another accidental speaker moment like Hastert.
Well, that doesn't make me feel very much better. Yeah,
well,
Denny Hastert was not exactly the.
I'm not talking about his personal.
No, I'm not even talking about that either. I'm not talking about that either. I don't think he was a very good Speaker of the House.
Well, I'm talking about the circumstances and how he became.
Right.
Speaker.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying that that sort of thing is.
I'm just telling you what I'm hearing. He just sent me a new message back saying Pompeo for speaker. we like Pompeo around here.
Yeah, Pompeo, why not? You know, but the point is that there are options here, and I think there are options that will appeal to, various factions within the Republican caucus. And let's also remember too, I mean, there's a lot of
We're not in a blinking hurry. I mean, honestly,
right.
We're really not.
We're not in a hurry, but let's not forget too, and we talk about factions and stuff like that in Republican civil wars and blah, 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 blah. The Democrats have these things too. When they have majorities, they have these same issues with blue dog Democrats, or however you want to divide these things up. But there's always factions within these caucuses. And part of the job of being speaker is finding a way to unite people like that. It's called herding cats, and John Boehner is obviously very tired of it, but that comes with the territory. And I think we need to maybe not blow it too far out of proportion here. Obviously, the conservatives in the House are not satisfied with the direction that leadership has taken them, and that's their prerogative. And I think, to some extent, they're justified in feeling that way. But at the end, they're going to have to figure out a way to work with everybody else too, to get everybody's agenda moving forward. And I think that Kevin McCarthy was just too much of the same thing. And then topping off that with the really dumb comments about Benghazi, which even McCarthy says were dumb and damaged his standing. Rightfully so. I mean, Kevin McCarthy's being pretty honest about it, and kudos to him for that.
Right.
I mean, I just think it's time to take a look at other options here.
Which again, I mean, it's... I understand the optics and I understand why he's doing what he's doing and the damaged goods. I get all that. But just think of where we're at, where literally 2 sentences can end a political career, essentially, or stop it from ascending.
Same as it ever was. I mean, you have to be...
Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, pick your Democrat, and there's no price, no penalty paid.
And I think the reason why that is, I think the reason why that is too, is that they had they had been around for a long time. See, this is the other thing too, is that McCarthy and Chaffetz and some of these other folks have been around a relatively shorter period of time, right? I mean, how long had Nancy Pelosi been in Congress before she became Speaker? I mean, I think she was there for 20 years, something like that, right? And I think we're just at, if I'm not mistaken, like 8 or 10 years for McCarthy. Might be a little longer than that. Chaffetz, the same thing. I think it might be shorter than that with Chaffetz, actually. I'm not sure. And that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be Speaker, but it does mean that they've had less time to build those types of coalitions for their to become leaders in the House. And so that's the type of thing that happens. And yes, if you say something really stupid on television, it can damage your political standing. I mean, that to me is not really new. That to me is fairly routine.
If you're a Democrat, you merely have to be a Democrat and have mostly the right ideological belief system.
Well, that's the other thing too, yeah.
What you say is secondary or tertiary. If you are a Republican, you have to be perfect. Because if you make one mistake, and it doesn't have to be a big one, it could be something you say, it could be something you vote for. If you make one mistake, not only do you screw yourself with the rest of the country, but you screw yourself with the rest of the party forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's no redemption. It's astounding.
Ask Bobby Jindal about his State of the Union response speech.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
I'm just saying.
We Republicans, we eat our own better than any political movement in the history of the world.
All right. Well, we got to get you.
Maybe with the exception of Idi Amin.
You went there.
Yeah, I did.
Or Timothy by the Buoys.
Yeah, that too.
There you go. I went there too. All right, Duane, we got to get you out of here. But what's coming up tonight what's coming up on tonight's Hugh Hewitt show?
I can promise you without a shadow of a doubt that there will not be one congressman on the show tonight.
Really?
You know why?
Why?
Because none of them are going to be on radio because it is a free-for-all. The last I just heard is it's a wide open field and there are 10, 12 people that may be thinking about jumping in. I mean, it's a feeding frenzy right now. Everybody is jockeying for position.
Yeah, it sounds like the Republican presidential nomination.
It's exactly what it's starting to sound like to me. So there's an open scrum that is underway right now, and it's not that everybody's mad, but everybody sees an opportunity and thinks that they're now it because the establishment has now fallen, and the window of opportunity is nigh. So. My guess is you're not going to see a lot of Republicans doing media because that's not who votes here. It's all internalized right now, and you're seeing the pre-explosion fission going on where everything's collapsing. You know, the dwarf star is happening. Everything's compressing. We will be talking to David Drucker. We'll talk to John Dickerson of CBS's Face the Nation today. You know, there's a presidential contest, too, so we may talk to people like Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz in about 2 hours and play that on today's show as well. Because, you know, it's not just all about the House of Representatives. There's, you know, the future of the country and the world at stake. And, you know, there's a couple of people that want to run for that, too. So we'll spend a little time with that.
Well, good. That sounds interesting. Did you guys talk about the whole Kilo thing with Donald Trump yesterday? Are you going to talk about that tonight?
That may come up with some of the other candidates.
Marco Rubio wrote a piece for us today. We put up a guest post for him today on eminent domain.
Eminent domain is the bee's knees with the Donald, huh?
Well, you know, eminent domain exists, and it's a constitutional concept. But the idea was that you convert property for use for the public good, not to hand it over to developers so that they can build themselves, you know, their own shopping malls and hotels and that sort of thing. And I mean, he came out and said he 100% agreed with Kilo, which really, I'm sorry, but that's basically government redistribution to crony capitalists. And if you're endorsing that, to me, that's kind of an
not
issue.
the most conservative principle.
It is not the most conservative principle.
That's not rank and file Freedom Caucus type stuff. That's not Tea Party material, is it?
It's not even basic conservatism. Basic conservatism respects private property and opposes government redistribution of wealth, especially the wealthy.
And if you're a populist and you're getting a lot of support from the libertarian side of things, that's not exactly the most populist position to hold either, is it?
Not at all. Not at all. So
kind of interesting, actually.
Very interesting. Very interesting to see how that plays out. Well, we'll be listening tonight to the Hugh Hewitt Show. We can watch it, by the way, if you're a member of the Huniverse, HUGHNIVERSE.com, the troll-free web surfing experience for Hugh Hewitt fans. I am a listener. I'm a member. You should be a member, too. Dwayne's a member. And if you are a member, you can actually watch the show unfold in the Hugh Hewitt studios. But if you're not a member, you have to listen to it on the AM radio band. And Duane, what happens if they can't find it on the AM radio band?
Declare for speaker. Lord knows everybody else is.
Exactly. You declare for speaker and try to fight it out through 10 or 12 other AM radio band stations. But hey, if you can't do that, you can always go to hughhewitt.com and listen to the audio stream, you cheapskate. Anyway.
After the Republican field, as big and crazy as it is, and everybody knows that the field's too big and it's getting chaotic, what do? We have a cage match now going on in the House of Representatives for Speaker.
We're a free market party, man. This is all about the free market. It's a free market thing.
We don't do groupthink well, do we?
No, we don't. We don't do groupthink, and that's a good thing. I like that about
it. It is.
I like that.
But this is the price you pay for having groupthink is you have a whole bunch of individuals.
This is it, man. This is free market, baby.
And
invisible hand.
It ain't pretty.
Invisible hand. What can I say? Tell it to the invisible hand. All right, Duane, Generalissimo Patterson of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Thanks for being with us today. It's going to be a couple of weeks before we get back because I'll be taking some vacation time, but we'll get back, I believe.
Oh, you bastard!
I
know.
You said
you could take a week off.
Hey,
you're going to run for speaker, aren't you?
Shh. That's not coming out until after Hillary testifies. You're not supposed to talk about that. This is off the record, folks. Off the record. No comment.
See ya.
See you later. We're back live, and thank you very much. It was a great segment with Duane Generalissimo Patterson. On the line with me right now is Craig Shirley, author of Last Act, The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan. It's the third in his series of Reagan, of his volumes of Reagan's biography, and this covers I believe, Craig, the last year or two of the presidency and all the way through his death in 2004.
Exactly. Yes, it does. Yes.
Now, before we get deep into Last Act, and again, Craig has written two previous volumes of the Reagan biography, which should be read by everybody. But before we get to that, I was just mentioning this to Craig about 10 minutes prior to me calling him. I got an email from the Washington Examiner saying that you've had a chance to look at the claims in another book about Ronald Reagan called Killing Reagan by Bill O'Reilly. And there is a dispute arising here about Reagan, specifically about whether or not he was showing signs of mental issues prior to leaving the White House. Is something that you emphatically insist was not the case in your book. In fact, it's one of the major issues that you cover in Last Act. And in O'Reilly's case, he's kind of recycling a claim that was made in a book called Landslide. I know Doyle McManus was one of the two authors of that, in which there was supposedly a long effort to determine whether or not they were going to have to invoke the 25th Amendment in the last couple of years of Ronald Reagan's presidency. And you're saying that this is total nonsense.
Yes. They base it on a memo written by James Cannon, who was a Howard Baker aide who came in March of '87. He had not observed Reagan. He had not spent any time with Reagan. He talked to Don Regan's aides, who were, of course, loyal to Don Regan and not to Ronald Reagan. And, of course, Don Regan was being unceremoniously fired for having an out-of-control ego and incompetence and making the White House a mess. And so he wrote a memo in which he later himself recanted and said, "There's nothing wrong with this guy that's sitting across the table from me. He's fit and fiddle." But that was never included in the O'Reilly book. That Cannon recanted the very memo on which O'Reilly's based much of his book.
Also, if going by Paul Bedard's column here in the Washington Examiner, it's it's pretty timely. It just went up maybe less than an hour ago, I believe.
Right. Yes.
That not only that, but they kind of stretched out even the original claims by saying that this was going on over a long period of time, and even the original story said it was just a weekend.
Over a weekend. That's right.
It was over one weekend, and. You're a historian. By the way, we should probably introduce you a little bit more properly at this point. He's written this is his fourth book, the third volume of the Reagan biography. The first two volumes were Rendezvous with Destiny and Reagan's Revolution. He also wrote December 1941, a look back at a month that changed history and saved the world. And, of course, also the president of Shirley and Bannister, marketing and government policy firm in Washington, D.C. And so you get around.
Yeah, more than I like to.
Yeah, probably. You're a busy guy, Craig. And
and I wish I wasn't.
But this is, the killing Reagan thing. These are rumors that have been going on ever since John Hinckley took a pot shot at Reagan, and maybe even before that. People were talking about the fact that he was. I remember this in 1979 and 1980 when he was ramping up for the first election. People were talking about the fact that he was 69 years old. He was sort of this, I think people had this idea of him as an amiable dunce, and maybe he was just a front guy for, people who were actually pulling the levers of power, that sort of thing. These types of stories kind of play along into that very long-standing thought about who Ronald Reagan was, and your biography is saying this is absolutely not who Ronald Reagan was.
And it's not just me, Ed. If it was just me, that would be one thing. But it is Lou Cannon and Ed Meese and Dick Allen and A.D. Culverhouse and so many other people who were there at the time, and other Reagan biographers who also have said, this is nonsense. Reagan was alert and was engaged and was charming and cognizant and all the other words from the moment he entered the White House until the moment he left the White House, and was for years after. It was only in the spring of 1994 when he went to the Mayo Clinic, as he did every year, and the doctors first noticed the preliminary signs of Alzheimer's. But that was 6 years after he left the White House.
Right. You talk about in the book that there is just irrefutable medical proof that Reagan was still on top of his game mentally and physically, and that is, if nothing else, it's the annual physical checkups, right? At Walter Reed. These are not the doctor taps on the knee, cough, have you cough, and you walk back out the door. These are serious medical tests that they do on presidents to make sure that there's nothing going wrong. Yeah,
there are number sequence tests and color sequence tests and other IQ testing that is done to determine if somebody is having any mental impairment, and Reagan showed no signs of it whatsoever.
It's a good thing that I'm not president. I'm not sure I could pass those, to be honest with you. I'm more than 20 years younger than Reagan was when he left office, so I don't know what that says about me, but I'm just as happy not being president anyway. So this is. I haven't read Bill O'Reilly's book. I haven't read any of his Killing series books. This is sort of a theme that he's got running: Killing Jesus, Killing Lincoln. I'm trying to think. There was one more that I can't think of.
Killing JFK.
Killing JFK. Thank you. It's sort of a sequence that they're running through, sort of a theme of books that they're putting together. The interesting part about this is that maybe somewhat true of JFK as well, but the other figures that he was focusing on were far enough in the past where contemporaries didn't have there weren't a whole lot of contemporaries to come up with alternative testimonies to what the book is claiming. That's not the case with Reagan.
And to your point is that unlike JFK and Lincoln and Jesus, is that Reagan wasn't killed.
Right.
A. And B is that his claim is not that Reagan was killed, but that Reagan suffered mental, affliction. And yet there are literally dozens of aides who testified that he was just as alert when he left office as when he came into the office.
Yeah, I mean, there was not a whole lot of evidence in the second term that there was an issue going on anyway. I mean, just like anybody else's second term, it wasn't perhaps not quite as brilliant as the first term, except for the fact that, he managed to hold the line on the Cold War and ended up winning it.
Right.
But, yeah,
well,
everybody has troubles with
I
second
wouldn't
terms.
give the second term a short shrift. There was tax reform. There was the deployment of the Pershing IIs. There was the historic missile agreements with Gorbachev. There were a lot of important speeches that were given. There were a lot of things that happened in the second term. There was the shoot down of Muammar Gaddafi's attack planes, and so there was the second term aid to the Contras. The second term was in some ways more involved, albeit maybe a little bit more nuanced than the first term.
Right. You didn't have the sparkling economic recovery because the sparkling economic recovery had already happened, so that was part of the new normal of the second term. Yeah,
right.
So those are the types of things that people talked about the second term blahs, as so to speak, that most second term presidents end up running into anyway because they set expectations high with the first term, and it's difficult to meet them in a second term. The current president being probably one of the best examples of that. But we won't get into that. We don't want to get into that. We got plenty to talk about here. I remember the funeral. And I also remember the day that the letter came out about Alzheimer's, and just how I was actually surprised at how emotional that was for me. I mean, he was the first president that I voted for. I didn't vote for him until the second term. I wasn't old enough in the first one to vote for him, but he was the first president I voted for. I was a huge fan of Ronald Reagan, not just politically, but personally too. And I was very surprised at how deep that went when that letter was read. And then it was 10 years later. I mean, I think we kind of expected, okay, well, in a few years, this gentleman is going to be on his, will be part of history. I don't think any of us really expected it to take 10 years. And man, that's an awfully long twilight for a guy who was as vital as Ronald Reagan.
And yet there was still a lot of living that went on in those 10 years. There was still a lot of speeches, and there was a lot of, travel and things like that. So he stayed active as long as he could.
As long as possible. That's the thing that gets lost.
I wouldn't give the letter too much short shrift, because even with his Alzheimer's, it's still a very cogent, tender, heartfelt letter.
It was
written, in complete sentences, and had flow and structure. And so even then, acknowledging the Alzheimer's, he's still bright and engaged.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember that being part of that gracious quality that people remembered about Ronald Reagan, and people recognized it contemporaneously about Ronald Reagan. They had a very gracious demeanor, and that was part of that. There was a lot of grace that went into that letter. But I mean, I think that's the reason why this book might be even more intriguing and maybe necessary, is because that whole final period, I think, we had the Clinton administration coming in. Even for those who are, politically inclined, there was all sorts of things that were going on that the Reagans weren't really that much of a part of. And I think there is a sense there.
They weren't a part of, but it was about him, because this is the time, and again, you hit the nail on the head, was that he'd left office, but it immediately triggered a great national debate that went on for a long time about his legacy and his place in history, and was he consequential? Was he a great president? All these things were discussed and debated in those years after he left the presidency, and even before and after the Alzheimer's was announced.
Right, and I think that, I think Republicans have always wanted to grasp the mantle of Reagan. I don't think there was any doubt among Republicans of what Ronald Reagan's historical.
There was some doubt. There was always a backwater of Bush Republicans, of moderate, of establishmentarian Republicans, who always questioned Ronald Reagan's policies and his legacy.
Well, they sure don't now, though, Craig. You notice that?
No,
everybody's the next
Ronald
Ronald Reagan.
Right. Yeah, no, the narrative has pretty much won out. That, as a matter of fact, don't ask me. Ask James McGregor Burns, who was, by all accounts, a liberal historian, but a great historian of Franklin Roosevelt, who said that he would place Reagan in the great or near great category. Another historian, John Patrick Diggins, who his last book, he was in many ways the official historian of the American left of the 20th century. He wrote books about the women's movement and the environmental movement. But his last book was Ronald Reagan, Fate, Freedom, and the Making of History. And this liberal historian comes to the conclusion that Ronald Reagan is one of our four greatest presidents alongside Washington, Lincoln, and Franklin Roosevelt because he saved or freed many, many people.
Right. Just not necessarily inside the United States. And I mean, I think you're right about that. And again, being a huge fan of Ronald Reagan, you're not going to need to try very hard to convince me of these things, Craig. Right. But it took a long time to convince a lot of other people. And even when, after he passed away in 2004, for a brief moment in time, I think the country really did come together to recognize what he meant for the United States of America during that period of official mourning. Now, that wasn't necessarily entirely,
and that's what I write about in the book, is that the country did come together, but there were still, even during the week of the Reagan funeral, there were those people from academia and those people in the columnists and media who were still attacking and deriding and saying some very unpleasant personal things about Ronald Reagan.
That was within my first year of blogging, and so this wasn't at Hot Air. This is my old blog, Captain's Quarters, and I have to go back and look through that. But I do recall this, and I do recall writing quite a bit about the fact that maybe this kind of discussion could take place. Oh, I don't know, next week. Maybe this is a nice time for people to just remember the good things that this man did and what he meant for this country without maybe necessarily slagging the guy during his funeral week. Now, of course, I understand politics and I celebrate freedom of speech, and people should say what they feel and feel free to engage as long as they feel free to hear the criticism that results from it. But with that said, Craig, and we know that this goes on all the time. I was actually still struck during that period about how remarkable those small little exceptions were during that week. I mean, they were loud, so they were very noticeable. Yes. They were noticeable because they were few. Afterwards, people are still debating what Reagan means and what he meant. But you have Barack Obama, who comes to the fore in 2008, and he's comparing himself to Ronald Reagan. I mean, it's a Democratic progressive presidential candidate who's talking about Ronald Reagan in at least somewhat positive terms. And I think that speaks volumes, if you will, about the reach of Ronald Reagan.
I certainly agree. He misunderstood and misinterpreted the meaning of Reagan and Reaganism, what he did for the country. But even so, is that Reagan is probably the most cited politician by Republicans and Democrats, and has been for many years. He's actually supplanted Franklin Roosevelt, and John Kennedy is the most quoted, is the most cited former president.
Well, he's pretty quotable. I mean, that's the thing about Ronald Reagan. He's pretty quotable. He was a pretty quotable politician and statesman, and remains so. Very well spoken. Here's the thing that I would, and this is not necessarily all about last act, the final years and emerging legacy of Ronald Reagan. And I'm holding up the book cover again, just to make sure everybody sees this. The link is in the show post, by the way. But I want to ask you something about one particular comparison to Ronald Reagan. It comes up every 4 years in the Republican primaries, anyway. Is you have people who come to the fore and they say, well, I was this way a few years ago, but hey, Ronald Reagan was a Democrat, and Ronald Reagan kind of came out of nowhere. And it's frustrating to me, Craig, and I'm wondering if it's frustrating to you, because people don't appreciate the fact that this was a guy who spent a decade on the road forming his political savoir-faire, and then ran for election at the state level and successfully. before he
right, at the
tried
age
on
of
national
55.
television at the age of 55. I mean, this is a guy who spent 10 years inventing himself and preparing himself for that. It wasn't just, oh, well, I was doing this last week and now I'm doing this. But Ronald Reagan did that. And that to me is a continuing point of frustration every 4 years.
Well, first of all, his change from, Democrat to Republican happened in 1964. And so, now it was 18 years later that he runs for president as a Republican, but he ran for governor as a Republican 2 years after switching parties. But he'd always said, the problem with the Democratic Party is that I didn't move away from it; it moved away from me. And in some ways, he was right. It was a little bit of probably of an exaggeration or justification, but the party had changed; it had become more radicalized, starting in the 1960s. So it was a fair point that he made.
So yeah, I mean, but his political instincts were always more conservative than the Democratic Party, and that was what he spent
and that
a long
started
time
in the 40s.
developing. Right.
First started with the tax policies of the time that had a tax rate up to 96%. And then he saw, when he was president of the Screen Actors Guild, he saw Soviet provocateurs trying to infiltrate the trade unions out in Hollywood,
right,
knowing how influential they could be over American culture and thought and political thought. So that began his historic move to the right, long before he sought elective office.
Let's move back to the last years, the final years of Ronald Reagan, and let's talk a little bit about Nancy Reagan, First Lady, who actually took quite a bit more criticism, I think, than even Ronald Reagan did as First
Yes.
Lady, and perhaps as a post-First Lady as well. There's always been sort of this undercurrent of hostility towards Nancy Reagan that, frankly, I find inexplicable. But how did she deal with that?
Let me help you. There was official disregard for Nancy Reagan after Reagan left office. The IRS moved into his own offices in Century City, and they were there for 6 months, auditing the Reagan's taxes because Nancy had been given or loaned some designer dresses by dress designers, and the IRS wanted to know if they'd paid taxes on it or not. So it was actually official harassment, not just muttering against her. And there was certainly a lot of muttering and a lot of columns against her, attacking her, criticizing her. She was the Lady Macbeth. She was the power behind the throne. All of which was nonsense.
Well, I know you talk about this in the book, but what do you think her legacy is going to be? Or is, frankly, what do you think her legacy is?
Well, first of all, as First Lady, she did a lot on drug addiction. Her Just Say No campaign was widely considered to be very successful. She had previously, as First Lady of California, had organized welcome home ceremonies for America's POWs from Vietnam, and she worked with I'm trying to think of his name, but with John McCain and other people to welcome them home. And then she had the foster grandparent program. And then, of course, after the AIDS was announced, or the Alzheimer's was announced, she did a lot of work raising money for AIDS research. So I think history is going to be a lot kinder, and I think history already is being kinder to Nancy Reagan than the columnists and the liberal editorialists were at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is probably a reckoning that's somewhat overdue, and I know it's something that you talk about in the book. And this was, in a way, it was kind of like one of the great political love stories, and even that at times got denigrated, I think, is a word that I'm looking for.
Yeah, the Nancy gaze was made fun of and things like that.
Yeah.
Stu Spencer, who was a very, very close aide to Reagan and very good friends with Reagan's, told me once of a story. He and Reagan were making a political trip, and they went to the Los Angeles train station, and Nancy drove them there. And she walks them in, and, there people are milling around, businessmen walking forth, paper boys hawking papers, whatever. And the two of them embrace as if they are the only two people in the world. They're completely oblivious to everything that's going around them. And told me he had never witnessed such singular devotion or love in his life.
And that should be a remarkable example, right? I mean, people turn that into a joke, and I don't know. I think it takes a very cynical heart to denigrate that sort of affection and devotion. And I think that was...
Well, but I think that's it. I think it was people who were very cynical. Don't forget, the 70s were a time of cynicism, and it was only in the 80s, one of Reagan's great triumphs that he wanted to do was restore the morale of the American people, and he said so in his farewell remarks that he regarded one of his biggest achievements was restoring the American morale. But cynicism was fashionable. The age of narcissism was mandatory reading for the cynics of Washington and New York and the elite media.
All right, Craig, I'm going to put you on the spot here because we talked about we alluded to this earlier, but now I'm going to put you on the spot. You got a pretty large range of Republicans running for the presidential nomination. Since you are the preeminent Ronald Reagan biographer, I'm going to ask you which of these, and it can be somebody who's dropped out of the race. I'll broaden it out. Which of these do you think comes closest to the Reagan mantle? I guess is the best way of putting it.
I would answer none and all.
Okay.
None of them. Well, you have to go back. Now, is that, as I said before, Ronald Reagan wasn't Ronald Reagan before Ronald Reagan was Ronald Reagan. And by that I mean is that he was not regarded by many people as a great leader or that he would make a great president, and wasn't regarded until after his presidency by most observers as being a great president. But having said that, is that virtually every president we've had, none of them were thought of that they would be great presidents before they were presidents. The only man who was thought to be a great president before he became president was George Washington. He's the only one. Everybody else, Abraham Lincoln, Harry Truman, Franklin Roosevelt, is that all of them, when they became president, were written about derisively, thought to have large shortcomings, and that they would be ultimately failures or be mediocre presidents. So, and same thing happened to Reagan. Was that a lot of people thought that he wouldn't be a great president, and it was only after he was president that people started to realize this was a great man who accomplished great things.
And that's what we find out about in Last Act, The Final Years and the Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan, the new book out, the third volume of the Ronald Reagan biography from Craig Shirley, and it's just coming out now. You can order it online through the link in my show post, and you can look for it in bookstores near you. And Craig, are you going out on tour to
I am. I kick off next week at the Reagan Library. I've got a talk there in Simi Valley, a talk, and then I'll do a book signing. And then I'm doing book signings here in Washington and New York City and San Antonio, and of course a lot of interviews along the way. So I'm bracing myself for the onslaught that starts next week.
Craig, if only you had a public affairs company that could handle this for you. I mean, it's just,
I know.
It's just,
shame,
it's Shirley and Bannister. Of course you've got one. But is there a website that people can go to follow up on that? Find out where you're going? CraigShirley.com. So they can catch up on everything there. Also, Shirley and Bannister Public Affairs website, they can also catch up on everything there as well. Which is sbpublicaffairs.com or CraigShirley.com. And I'll update the show post with those links, by the way. And that way you can follow along and find out whether Craig's coming nearby you, and you can get yourself a signed copy of Last Act, The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan. Craig, thank you so much for being with us today. It's a pleasure talking to you, and good luck with your tour.
Oh, Ed, thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Take care, sir. Craig Shirley has been my guest, and we are just about ready to wrap this thing up here. Don't forget, Last Act, The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan. That is the third volume of a 3-volume biography. The other 2 volumes are Rendezvous with Destiny and Reagan's Revolution. And Craig also has another book, December 1941, that's not related to Ronald Reagan. And maybe he's working on a 5th, who knows. But he'll be going out on tour, and you can sign his book then. Speaking of which, No time like the present to plug my book coming out sometime in the spring. We're actually now kind of debating when exactly it is. So it may not be April. It could be May. It could be sometime there in the spring. We're still working on dates, but Going Red will be coming out next spring, and I'll be doing book tours then too. So you can, we'll have a website and all that kind of fun stuff. Can't talk too much about it yet. I can tell you it's about the 2016 general election, and that's about all I can tell you. But what I can tell you is after the show was over on Tuesday, we got acceptance on the final version of the manuscript. So the book is going into production, and now all we have to do is, go through the copy editing process, which is a different sort of thing. It's a little bit less intense. Just basically making sure that, usages are consistent, that I've introduced people before I have them in there and that sort of thing. It's a lighter version of what we've been doing for the last couple of weeks with the book, and we'll start that probably in early November. But it's called Going Red. I'll have a book cover for you soon, I think, and we'll start working on doing some more promotional material. So be sure to keep an eye out. But you can pre-order now. The link is in the show post. You can pre-order now if you like. It's already up on Amazon. The subtitle of the book is incorrect on Amazon. It is changed a little bit, but the main title, Going Red, has not changed. And you can, like I said, pre-order it now. Pre-ordering is good, by the way. We're happy with pre-orders. So you can order on Kindle. You can order on hardcover. And there will be an Audible version of the book. I'm just not sure if it's coming out at exactly the same moment. I believe that they'll all come out on the same date, but we'll know more about that as we go along. Do I need another copy editor? No. The publisher does all that, which is kind of nice. I don't have to worry about that. You have to do that. By the way, self-publishing, this is not a self-published book. It is not about Ed Morrissey forcing John Boehner out of the speakership. That would have been an awesome book, but I'd have somebody else write that. Self-publishing this is not a self-published book. It's coming out from Crown Forum. Crown Forum is publishing this book, and which is good. But there's certainly nothing wrong with self-publishing. But when you do self-publish, you are usually required to hire yourself a copy editor, because even the self-publishers want to make sure that the book is at least clean in that sense. And I have a friend who's self-published a couple of books. In fact, I had him on the show a few years ago. And he had me do the copy editing for the book, and it saved him some money, which I was happy to do because that was what I used to do for a living a long time ago. 30 years ago, it's what I did for a living. All right. Yeah, that would be Going Orange. Thank you, Ironcad. Rim shot for Ironcad. There you go. All right. I want to thank the folks in the chat room. A lot of fun today on the show. I want to thank Cranky T-Rex, our chat room moderator, at Cranky T-Rex for the Twitterses, crankytrex.blogspot.com for the blogging, and of course buzzpo.com where he does some professional writing, and occasionally for hotair.com. That's always good. Let's see. Who else has been around? I thought I saw a monster in here, but maybe I was just fooling myself there. But so nobody kept the chat room safe for democracy except for Duke of the Dance. So, oh well, opportunity missed. That's my fault. I probably should have put somebody up on that level there. But we'll play some walking music anyway. I are an English major. All right, who else has been in the chat room? Don't forget to put your own URLs up in the chat room. We're all about shameless blog promotion here at the Ed Morrissey Show. We've got Conservative and Liberal Hands, Fausta from faustasblog.com, a great Western Hemisphere blog. I read her every single day, and so should you. Little known fact about Fausta, she convinced John Boehner to retire. That's right, Fausta is the one who convinced John Boehner to retire. Little known fact about Fausta from faustasblog.com. Guelph, Ironcad, Jan Sobieski's back, yay. Jeff Dunitz from jeffdunitz.com. The Lid, I think it's called lidblog.com is the URL now. But maybe jeffdunitz.com redirects. I don't know. Jeff can tell you. He'll put the URL up in the chat room like you all should be doing with your stuff. Juanita Cabron, Mothra, Mr. Fastbucks, one of the fabulous tribbles here at the Ed Morrissey Show. Don't forget the Hugh Hewitt Show will start in 41 minutes. And you can watch it at the Universe, HUGHNIVERSE.com. Be a member. Buy your membership. Pabo from Finland came the farthest today to see the Ed Morrissey show. Pabo is, of course, our diplomatic representative to the ABBA Museum in Stockholm, Sweden, and eventually we'll get a diplomatic report. Eventually. All right, who else? Prairie Dog SD, right-wing aviator. Right-wing aviator, welcome to the show. Steve Egg from NoRunnyEggs.com. And he's back on Twitter. He's been on Twitter now for a little bit of time. Steve Egg there. T-Rand, TR4A, my cousin Mike, who had the great Wikipedia entry for my Uncle Jim, mentioned earlier in the show. Make sure you click over on that and see that. Conservative Liberal Hands is at 3planets.com. So there you go. Via Paso at the Ancestral Morrissey Manse. Hi, Mom. And the first mate behind me, keeping me on the straight and narrow. All right, folks. Tuesday, we'll be back with Andrew Malcolm of Investors Business Daily, the Prince of Twitter. We'll also have a couple other guests on Tuesday. Who are they? I don't know. That would require me to actually do some planning. But we'll have some great guests, so be sure to tune in Tuesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Central, 1 on the left coast. Until then, have yourselves a great weekend, folks. Don't miss a minute of the Ed Morrissey Show. We'll see you later.